At 5-4 inches the third set tiebreak, in the middle of a screaming, sold-out Madrid crowd, Carlos Alcaraz did something that perfectly captures the current state of his career. He didn't look at the ball after his serve. And he didn't look at Samuel Lopez, the man officially tasked with guiding him through this final. Instead, Alcaraz looked at an empty blue seat in the player's box. It was the seat usually occupied by Juan Carlos Ferrero. Even as the trophy was lifted and the confetti settled on the clay of the Manolo Santana Stadium, the image that remained was not one of triumph, but of a young man searching for a ghost. Stay with me. Because while the tennis world is celebrating Alcaraz's resilience and his ability to win without his primary mentor, the reality revealed in just 7 words, during his post-match interview, suggests something far more concerning. What we witnessed in Madrid wasn't just a title run. It was a secret cry for help. To understand why a victory over Jannik Sinner in a 3-hour epic feels like a psychological red flag, we have to look at the atmosphere leading into this final. For the first time in 12 major finals, Juan Carlos Ferrero was not there. A minor family emergency kept him in Villena, leaving Samuel Lopez, a respected veteran but a secondary figure in Alcaraz's inner circle, to hold the clipboard. On paper, it shouldn't have mattered. Carlos is world-class. He knows how to hit a forehand. But tennis at this level is 90% emotional tethering. And on Sunday, that tether was vibrating with anxiety. The match itself was a brutal, physical war 6-4, 3-6, 7-6. On the surface, Alcaraz was the hero we've come to expect. He fought off break points, he hit 42 winners, and he outlasted the most consistent player on the tour. But the data tells a deeper story of instability. Alcaraz's first serve percentage fluctuated wildly, dropping to 48% in the second set. Exactly where the realization of Ferrero's absence seemed to hit him hardest. He wasn't playing against Sinner. He was playing against the silence from his own box. Every time Carlos missed a crucial shot, his eyes didn't seek tactical advice from Samuel Lopez. They sought the shadow of the man who wasn't there. He looked at that empty blue seat after 14 of the 19 points in the final tiebreak. This isn't the behavior of a fully autonomous champion. This is the behavior of a player who is psychologically tethered to a singular authority figure. So much so that even in victory, he feels incomplete. The narrative you'll hear on every other sports network is that Alcaraz has matured because he won without Ferrero. But that is not what happened. What happened was a survival act by a player who is increasingly terrified of his own independence. When he finally spoke after the match, he didn't talk about his tactical adjustments or his physical grit. He talked about a shadow. And in doing so, he exposed a vulnerability that Jannik Sinner and Novak Djokovic will be studying very closely as we head toward Roland Garros. The standard reading is that this was a tribute to his coach. The less generous reading, the one we are going to explore, is that Alcaraz just admitted he is losing his sense of self. To understand why this is a crisis of independence, we have to look at the words Alcaraz chose in the immediate aftermath of his victory. Usually, when a player wins a title without their main coach, the narrative is about stepping up or proving I can do it on my own. But Alcaraz didn't do that. Speaking to the on-court interviewer for ATP Media, still sweating from the 3-hour battle, Alcaraz said, "I played today for someone who isn't here, but whose shadow is everywhere." In the world of professional tennis, we often talk about finding your own game. The moment a young prodigy stops being a student and starts being a master. For Alcaraz, that transition was supposed to happen in Madrid. With Ferrero in Villena, this was the perfect stage for Carlos to show the world and himself that the Alcaraz system is self-sustaining. Instead, he spent the entire afternoon trying to summon a ghost. The word doing the real work in that quote is shadow. By saying Ferrero's shadow was everywhere, Alcaraz was admitting that he wasn't looking at the tactical reality of the court. He was looking for the permission of a man who wasn't in the building. That is not autonomy. That is a tether. Now, look at the data from the match when that tether started to fray. During the second set, Alcaraz committed 16 unforced errors. In a typical Ferrero-led match, you see a specific pattern. Alcaraz makes a mistake, looks at the box, receives a precise hand signal, or a short, sharp technical cue, and stabilizes. But on Sunday, when he looked at the box, Samuel Lopez was there, a great coach, but not the shadow. But the cameras caught Alcaraz shaking his head, not in disagreement with the tactics, but in a sort of desperate search for something else. He wasn't looking for a how. He was looking for a who. The common understanding is that Alcaraz is lucky to have such a deep bond with Ferrero, but the reality is that this bond has become a ceiling. Juan Carlos Ferrero, speaking to Marca earlier this year, noted that Carlos is still a boy who needs to be told when to eat and when to sleep. We laughed at that then. We thought it was a charming detail about a young superstar, but in the heat of a Madrid final, that charm turned into a liability. If you need to be told when to sleep, how can you be expected to decide, on your own, how to break the best baseline defender in the world when your primary source of authority is 400 miles away? The problem arrives when the mentor becomes the only mirror in which the player can see their own success. On Sunday, Alcaraz won the match. But he lost the battle for his own identity. He proved he could beat Sinner, but he failed to prove he could exist without the shadow. Every time he pointed to his heart and looked at the empty seat, he wasn't celebrating his own strength. He was signaling his own incompleteness. He was telling the world that the trophy in his hand didn't feel real, because the eyes that matter most weren't there to witness it. That is not the mindset of a man ready to dominate a decade. That is the mindset of a genius who is terrified of the dark. If Alcaraz's words in the post-match interview revealed the internal crack, it was his behavior during the most high-pressure moments of the third set that provided the visual evidence. To understand the depth of this secret cry for help, we have to look at what was happening in the player's box, or more accurately, what wasn't happening. Mats Wilander, a man who has watched every major final of the last 4 decades and has no reason to exaggerate, provided the most chilling observation of the night. Speaking to Eurosport shortly after the trophy ceremony, Wilander noted, "Carlos looked at the box after every single point, but he wasn't looking for tactics. He was looking for a ghost. You could see it in his eyes. He was looking at the empty space where Ferrero usually sits, even when Samuel Lopez was standing up and cheering right next to it. He's saying Alcaraz was haunted." This is the secret revelation of the Madrid final. The world saw a player and his substitute coach working in tandem to overcome a rival. But if you look at the raw footage of the third set tiebreak, a different story emerges. At 5-5, after a grueling 2-2 shot rally that Sinner won, Alcaraz turned to the box. Samuel Lopez was on his feet, gesturing wildly for Carlos to stay aggressive, to keep the ball deep. But Alcaraz didn't make eye contact with Lopez. His gaze drifted 6 inches to the left, to the vacant seat. For 3 long seconds, he stared at nothing. He wasn't looking for a how. He was looking for the who. He was looking for the authority figure whose shadow he claimed was everywhere. This is what we mean by a secret cry for help. In professional tennis, the box is a mirror. When a player looks at their coach, they are looking for a reflection of their own confidence. But for Alcaraz, that mirror is currently only one way. Without Ferrero, the mirror was blank. Now, look at the reaction of Samuel Lopez. Throughout the match, Lopez did everything right. He was vocal. He was supportive. And his tactical advice was sound. But there were moments where the cameras caught a look of profound frustration on Lopez's face. Not because Carlos was playing badly, but because Carlos was treating him like a placeholder. There is a specific kind of loneliness in being a world-class coach standing in the box of a superstar who is looking through you rather than at you. This is the Ferrero dependency in its rawest form. It's a pattern we've seen before in the history of the game, but rarely this early in a career. Think of the psychological tether between a young Steffi Graf and her father, or the early years of the Williams sisters. But Alcaraz was supposed to be the new era champion, the one built for the modern, independent game. Instead, Madrid revealed that the 2-3-year-old is operating within a psychological ceiling. He can win a Masters 1000 on sheer talent and grit, but he is doing it while tethered to an absent ghost. The anxiety isn't about whether he can hit a forehand. The anxiety is about what happens when the shadow finally fades. If Alcaraz needs to see Ferrero to feel secure, then his rivals don't need to beat his tennis. They just need to wait for the moments when the shadow isn't there to hold his hand. The shadow was everywhere in Madrid. But a shadow is not a person. A shadow provides no warmth, no real instruction, and no true stability. By admitting he played for a ghost, Alcaraz inadvertently admitted that he hasn't yet learned how to play for himself. To push this analysis to its logical conclusion, we have to look beyond the internal team and toward the observers who understand the weight of historical precedent. Greg Ruseski, speaking on the Sky Sports Tennis broadcast immediately following the final point, offered a warning that shifts the focus from the heart to the body. Carlos looked at the box after every point because he wasn't just looking for tactics. He was looking for permission to feel tired. When you play 22 matches in 6 weeks, your body isn't just failing. Your mind is looking for someone to tell you it's okay to stop. Without Ferrero there to set the boundary, Alcaraz is just running on fumes and raw emotion. This Madrid title is a triumph of will, but it might be a disaster for his structural longevity. It suggests that the shadow isn't just about winning points. It's about the regulation of a human machine. Juan Carlos Ferrero doesn't just coach tennis, he manages Alcaraz's internal thermostat. And in Madrid, that thermostat was broken. Now, I want to be honest about the limits of this argument. There is a completely valid, generous reading of this story, the one that 90% of the tennis media is currently selling you. That version says, Carlos Alcaraz is a 23-year-old warrior who just won a Masters 1000 without his head coach. He proved he is the best in the world. The talk about ghosts and shadows is just poetic noise. You could argue that winning 7-6 inches the third against a peak Jannik Sinner is the ultimate proof of autonomy. If he were truly dependent, he would have folded the moment Sinner took the second set. He didn't fold. He won. But both of these readings can be true at once. It is possible to be a world-class athlete and a psychologically tethered student simultaneously. The problem isn't that Alcaraz can't win without Ferrero. The problem is the cost of that victory. In Madrid, Alcaraz didn't look like a man enjoying his tennis. He looked like a man performing an exhausting tribute. He looked like a man who felt that if he lost, he wasn't just losing a match, he was failing the shadow. He spent every ounce of his emotional reserve trying to bridge the gap between Madrid and Villena. He won the trophy, but he might have emptied the tank just weeks before the one tournament that defines his season, Roland Garros. When the relationship between a player and a coach becomes this absolute, the player's identity begins to blur. That is not a partnership. That is a fusion. And as any structural engineer will tell you, a fusion that cannot survive a temporary separation is not a foundation, it is a fragility. Alcaraz didn't just beat Sinner on Sunday. He survived the silence of his own box. But as we head into the clay court climax in Paris, the question isn't whether he can hit the ball. The question is whether he can find a way to look at the court without searching for a ghost in the stands. My prediction is this, and I am going to commit to it. The Madrid title will not be remembered as the moment Alcaraz arrived as an independent champion. It will be remembered as the moment his exhaustion became visible. We are heading into a Roland Garros, where the physical demands are twice as high, and the best-of-5 format leaves nowhere to hide. If Ferrero is not in that box from day one, providing the warmth and the structure that Alcaraz so clearly craved in Madrid, we are not looking at a title favorite. We are looking at a player on the verge of a significant burnout. I want to be honest about the limits of this argument. It is entirely possible that Alcaraz is simply a more emotional, more expressive athlete than the big three were at his age. Maybe his need for Ferrero isn't a dependency, but a partnership that we just haven't seen the likes of since Tony and Rafa. But the courts will be the judge. Come back to this video when the quarterfinals of Roland Garros begin. Everything we have discussed today, the shadow in the box, the structural fatigue, the search for a ghost will either look like prescient analysis or it will look like overcautious noise. If Alcaraz is lifting the Coupe des Mousquetaires in 3 weeks, he will have proven that he can carry the shadow until it becomes his own light. But if he falls early, if the wrist flares up, or if the mental fatigue takes its toll, remember the empty blue seat in Madrid. Tell me in the comments what you actually think. Is Carlos Alcaraz a genius who is rightfully honoring his mentor? Or are you starting to worry that he is becoming too dependent on Juan Carlos Ferrero to ever truly reach his ceiling? Does a world number one need a shadow to win? Or is that the very thing holding him back from GOAT status? If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The most interesting takes always end up at the top. So get in there. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.